These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turners Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? Here we are in the centre of London, just north of Trafalgar Square, in the National Gallery, one of the great glories of British cultural life, and home to more than 2,000 of the world's finest paintings. Most of the paintings here have come from thousands of miles away, from Italian hill towns, Europe's major cities, and Britain's rural counties. The men and women who created them could never have guessed they'd end up here. But there's one painting hanging in the National Gallery specifically designed for these walls, even if the painter concerned couldn't bear to let it out of his sight during his lifetime. It is, of course, the Fighting Temeraire. It's a haunting image. To the backdrop of a pink, grey, orange sunset chugs a small dark steamer, pulling a shimmering, pale sailing ship. This is a painting that has captured the imagination of generation after generation. I've sort of lived with this picture for most of my life. One of my schoolrooms when I was a kid had a print of it, and I can remember worrying that the big ship didn't have any sails out, which is kind of the point. I was a little bit thick. Some of you will have done jigsaws of the Fighting Temeraire, others will have eaten biscuits out of tins with the Temeraire on the lid. It's everywhere. But why? What is it about this painting that resonates even now? Well, for starters, it was made by a man that many see as Britain's finest ever artist, Joseph Mallard William Turner. Turner was the kind of artistic superstar of British painting in the early 19th century. He was particularly well known for his seascapes. This was still very much a seafaring country, and Turner was the master painter of all of that. Time and time again, Turner relished saltwater drama, the storms, the heart-stopping moments of wreckage and loss. So why was it this calm, limpid seascape, silent, melancholy, that meant so much to him? So the story of the picture is very, very simple and straightforward. The Temeraire, which had fought with Nelson at Trafalgar, is finally being tugged away to a shipbreaker's yard on the Thames, and she's being taken there by one of the newfangled steam paddleboat tugs that were on the Thames at the time. Turner brought his canvas to life with a flurry of confident brushwork, bold strokes of his palette knife, and even the press of his thumb. Now, these are pretty intimidating walls for any painting to hold its own. Turner's Temeraire is hemmed in on all sides by the greatest works of the greatest painters in the Western canon. And yet, time and again, the Fighting Temeraire is voted Britain's favourite painting. And indeed, it's recognised across the globe as an iconic piece of 19th century art. So, what's the secret of the Fighting Temeraire? To answer that, we have to go back to this painting's origins, because behind the image, so simple and so patriotic, lies another story of class, ambition, and opportunism. A story just as British, but rather more calculated. The story of this painting and the artist who created it may begin just a few hundred yards away from the National Gallery, but a world away from the grand institutions of the high and mighty.
Turner was a Londoner. He was born in a narrow, dark little street called Maiden Lane in Covent Garden, right in the heart of the capital. His father was a wig maker and a barber and had a shop in Covent Garden.
Turner was extremely working class. Nowadays, if your parent had a hair salon in Covent Garden, you'd be living a good life, but not back then. His sister died at the age of 5, and his mother ended up in a mental asylum. But he used to love to draw and paint, and that was his way of finding comfort in a world that was slowly being taken from him with the loss of his family.
Turner's reassurance would always come in the form of brushes, oils, and canvas. Even at this early age, he showed the same passion that would be the driving force behind his Temeraire. His talent, particularly to his father, was obvious from the start.
Because of the shop, the family were brought into the path of some wealthy and influential men, and Mr. Turner Sr. took full advantage of this circumstance. He used his shop as his son's earliest exhibition venue, putting his juvenile watercolours for display and then charging his customers 1 shilling to see them, which might not sound like a lot of money, but 1 shilling is the entrance fee to the Royal Academy, at the time the most prestigious art venue. So it shows just how ambitious he is for his son at this time.
Turner instinctively understood what people wanted, and he was making money from his art, his watercolour landscapes, town scenes, and monuments, before he even reached his teens. But this barber's son wanted more.
From the age of 14, which was young even in those days, he was admitted to the Royal Academy for his precocity in painting and drawing. And from the moment he started to exhibit, people loved his work.
It's fair to say he explodes onto the British art scene. His watercolours are the first thing. They're described as miraculous. People can't believe the effects that he manages to achieve in a medium that's very underrated at this time. Almost straight away, it becomes clear that Turner is a star. He is made a Royal Academician at the youngest age ever, only 26 years old.
Right from the beginning, Turner would draw and paint what he knew best. And he was really a child of the Thames. He was born just a stone's throw from the river, and all his life he was obsessed by water. Calm water, dangerous, stormy water, boats, ships, and the British all afloat. This was an artist determined to render the world he was living in, the here and now, directly onto his canvas. Turner was inspired by almost everything around him. And the work he made was different. It was wilder, brighter, more expressive, somehow more urgent. He was pushing the boundaries of what could be done with oil and pigment, and it was making him rich. But although Turner had enjoyed his first delicious taste of acclaim and earned enough money to lift him and his father far from their shop, he wanted much more. He wanted, and which serious artist doesn't, a legacy. He wanted paintings which would live long after he had died. The Fighting Temeraire is one of the most recognizable paintings in the world. But what's the real story behind this evocative image? And why was it quite so important to the artist who created it, J.M.W. Turner? It was certainly the work of a man who had transcended a difficult childhood with extraordinary talent. It was clear, almost as soon as he picked up his first piece of chalk, that Turner was something special. The first part of his life is success upon success upon success. This was an artist who in his 20s had taken London by storm. At just 29, he opened his own gallery and began selling hundreds of paintings every year. His bright, skillful maritime scenes and landscapes couldn't have come from any other hand, and it wasn't just the public that couldn't get enough. In 1807, he was appointed a professor at the prestigious Royal Academy. High, mighty, but Turner wanted higher still. In 19th century London, this was an astonishing rise for a boy from a barber's shop. But although he never lost his Cockney accent and remained proud of his origins all his life, there was one area where his background was causing real trouble for Turner. The man who'd create the Temeraire wanted not just cash and respect in his life, but a legacy. He wanted his painting to outlive him long after his death, and that meant big commissions, and that meant catching the eye of King George IV.
He really, really wanted a royal commission. He wanted the chance to paint something for the king.
He knew he was good, so he was arrogant, really. He believed he was very clever and he wanted people to appreciate what he did.
A lot of people didn't take to Turner. There was a lot of snobbery, and that's probably because of his personality. You know, he didn't hold back, and it wasn't quite the right flavour within genteel company.
And then finally he got the chance he'd been waiting for. George IV was a passionate collector of souvenirs from the Napoleonic Wars, and he was keen for a painting commemorating its most famous sea battle.
Excitingly for him, in 1822, he is commissioned to paint a picture of the Battle of Trafalgar, which is destined for part of a decorative scheme in the state apartments at St James's Palace.
It's now hanging in London's National Maritime Museum. This image is the precursor to Turner's Temeraire, and it delivers on a remarkable scale. The sailors on board are almost miniaturized by Nelson's flagship, the colossal HMS Victory, which dominates the frame. Even Nelson, in the throes of death, is reduced to a matchstick figure, and yet the human drama still packs a mighty punch. For the senior curator here at Greenwich, Quintin Colville, it takes pride of place at his museum.
What you can see here is the height of the Battle of Trafalgar. Nelson's flagship, HMS Victory, is in the foreground, dominating the scene. Around it are clustered other warships, British, French and Spanish, engaged in one of the great naval battles of all time. You can see in this painting that Turner is deeply concerned with the cost of war and the human dimension of the war, which he brings to us through these resilient British sailors in the thick of the fight.
You get a real sense of the sort of the gory details, people falling from the riggings, the shattered masts and the torn sails, but also the bodies in the foreground, drowning hands rising from the bloody waters. That really confronts you.
If this painting was all about winning the favour of the court, Turner had taken some remarkable risks. It really wasn't at all what they'd expected.
The painting attracted a good deal of criticism when it was first unveiled at St James's Palace. One of the things that was commented upon at the time was the way in which perhaps he merged different periods of the battle together. But it was also the details of rigging and masts and spars and signals that had people hot under the collar.
Turner could feel royal approval and perhaps his one and only chance to win it disappearing. His big gamble had failed.
The public wanted something more esteemed, more proper, more respectful. It wasn't what they wanted in terms of a commemorative painting.
George IV was also critical of the painting, and ultimately it did not remain at the place where the commission was intended, St James's Palace, but was given to the Naval Gallery at the Royal Hospital in Greenwich.
Turner got very angry. He felt by then he was the artist. They'd asked him to paint it. They should have let him have free rein, and he painted it in the best way possible. And he didn't want to paint for the king anymore.
Disaster. Turner's attempt to capture a key moment from British history had been consigned to history, and his ability to leave a lasting mark on British art seemed out of reach. He'd had his moment, and he'd blown it.
In particular, the public was struggling with the very bright and vibrant colours that Turner tended to use. They also struggled with this characteristic haziness that many of Turner's later pictures in particular demonstrate. For a contemporary audience who are preconditioned to expect a very high level of detailed finish, this was very problematic. They couldn't read the brushstrokes for the metaphors that they were meant to be for sort of dabs of light. They could only see them as very loose, unfinished, and therefore rough and undesirable patches of paint.
But this working-class barber's son hadn't worked so hard for so long just to fade away. If the way to the public's heart was to give them a ripping yarn, then for his next piece, that's just what he'd do. And in 1838, as he reached the grand old age of 63, a national event gave him what all of us need at some point, a second chance. This is a narrative painting in that it tells a story, and Turner really wanted it to tell a story. In fact, the full title of the painting is The Fighting Temeraire, Tugged to Her Last Berth to be Broken Up, 1838, a specific moment in a specific year. Although the Napoleonic Wars had happened 30 years before, there was a revival of interest in the subject, spurred in part by King George's own fascination with it.
This interest in the Navy manifests itself in several ways, which I think is why it's so interesting. There's a newly cleared area of London just by the Strand, and it was decided to call it Trafalgar Square. At the same time, they decide to have a competition for a monument to go in Trafalgar Square, and that's when the idea for Nelson's column came along. Everyone is not only talking about Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar, they're talking about the Royal Navy in general.
Nelson mania had well and truly swept the nation.
All of these objects relate either to the Battle of Trafalgar or to the death of Admiral Lord Nelson. And they range across different classes, different groups of income. You can see cheap, mass-produced ceramics like mugs and cups. A very expensive object over here, a crocus planter. Down here, there are children's toys modelled on Nelson's funeral procession.
The names of the great battleships were on everyone's lips: the Victory, the Defiance, the Conqueror, and of course the Temeraire.
They required objects like this to bring the personalities of those who fought, and also the ships themselves, into their sitting rooms, into their lives, into their houses. So these objects were the essential currency for bringing naval glory and valour into people's real worlds.
This had been the biggest conflict of a generation, their Great War, and the commanders and sailors who made up those fleets were still celebrated heroes. This was still very much a maritime naval country, very proud of its navy. What happened to sailors, what happened to ships, was absolutely crucial to the whole country. Turner knew that, and painting that was his great speciality and skill. So when Turner heard that one of the warships, the Temeraire no less, was going to be towed down the Thames on its way to the scrapyard, he knew this could be a very powerful image.
The Temeraire was a symbol of national security. She was a symbol of sea power, a symbol of royal naval might, and people knew that that is what had kept them secure. That is what essentially had won the Napoleonic Wars. And that meant that when a ship was taken away, perhaps captured by the enemy, very rare occasion, or in the case of the Temeraire, dismantled, then there was a real sense of loss and grieving felt by the nation.
The Temeraire, at this stage still known by its naval nickname, the Saucy Temeraire, had had a hugely important role at Trafalgar.
When HMS Victory came under very heavy fire from the French warship Redoutable, it was the Temeraire that came to the Victory's rescue. moving alongside and in fact firing a terrible broadside into the stern of the French warship.
She has then rescued Nelson from losing his ship, and then he has captured another ship, and this is all within the first hour or so of the battle. And it's that story of her which is the basis of her fame.
All warships, in the eyes of their crews, have personality, something distinctive about them in the way that they handle. They provide a role that is not simply one of fighting, but of protecting those who live within them. But beyond that, when they've been connected with great events, like Trafalgar, for instance, they carry a popular appeal. Their name becomes known and travels far and wide.
By September 1838, she was long out of date as a warship. For the past 25 years, she'd been in service on the home front, even being used to house prisoners down in Cornwall. But despite that, she hit headlines across the country when she at last set off for the Breakers' Yard in Rotherhithe.
That was the largest ship to be broken up. It was taken the furthest along the Thames of any of the warships left over from the Battle of Trafalgar. So it was quite a momentous occasion, and Turner was very good at capturing dramatic moments in the history of his life.
The British came and flocked to see this because you were welcoming home heroes. This wasn't just any old ship, this was a hero. It was very important to the British morale.
That's what's so clever about Turner painting the Temeraire. He was tapping into the spirit of the country at just the moment when, from out of the brick dust and the squalor, Trafalgar Square was beginning to take shape. So he had the glorious popular subject for his painting. But could he do justice to this opportunity? This was the chance to overcome the disappointments of the last decade and leave a lasting legacy. How could one image convey the immense weight of a nation mourning for an era that was about to end? The Fighting Temeraire is much more than simply an attempt to catch a moment in time. By choosing that subject at that period in history, Turner, a man always with one eye on the public mood, was setting himself up for a win. The Napoleonic Wars engulfed a continent in conflict for more than 10 years, climaxing at sea in the bloody clash of the Battle of Trafalgar. So just over 3 decades later, in 1838, Londoners were fascinated by the fate of the Temeraire, that celebrated old warhorse which had fought valiantly in Lord Nelson's fleet. Hundreds of people flocked to see her final voyage.
For most of the population, these warships, these ships that kept them safe at night, they kept the Frenchmen from the door, operated beyond the horizon, often on the other side of the world. And yet here was a chance to actually see one in the flesh. Beautiful wine glass shape of her hull that's all been made by hand by Englishmen in Chatham. So she's a symbol of Britishness, a symbol of British sea power, and she's something to be enjoyed.
It was a massive task to break her down. She'd been built from 5,000 oak trees, which left a lot of wood to be reused.
It's had a real history. We know that sailors left their marks on the gun decks. They left graffiti all over it. So this was not an inanimate object. This is an object that's been inhabited by hundreds of men for years and years and years. It's something that really just breathes history.
It would have been brought for salvage. People wanted souvenirs from it, so the wood would have been used to build houses from it, for example.
If you look closely enough, there are still some clues that reveal the eventual fate of the remains of this iconic ship. Hidden away in Rotherhithe is St. Mary's Church. Dating back to 1716, it has a close connection to Britain's seafaring history, and in it are 2 large chairs and 1 altar made from the wood of the broken Temeraire. Father Mark Nichols is the rector here.
This was a very busy part of London, connecting with the Empire. The Navy was built nearby, and the idea, I think, that Turner had about the Temeraire was a link with the past and a change into the modern era. And to have these things here really connects us with our local and national history.
Sir Henry Newbolt wrote a ballad titled The Fighting Temeraire that said, "She's fading down the river, but in England's song forever." Everyone wanted to have a slice of the legacy of this historic ship.
We know that a barometer was made from her wood. We know that a gong stand was made from her wood, a chair, and there's even the story of someone having a wooden leg made out of her wood. And it's nice to think that there are perhaps little pieces of the Temeraire in houses all over London.
The nation had woven the legend of the Temeraire into its past, present, and future. The big question was, how would Turner deliver such a weight of emotion on canvas? He was a very, very aggressive and rivalrous painter. He liked to take on his rivals like Constable and the rest of them and show that he was the best. So whenever Turner produced a special picture like this one, he was making a statement. This is going to knock your socks off. All across this canvas, you can see the creative and even experimental techniques Turner applied to his Temeraire. Some parts are painted with minute precision. The detail on the ship, for example, renders every facet of her hull with fine, flickering strokes. While across the sky, he's used much thicker, almost angry slatherings of paint to bring the canvas to dramatic life. Turner was an obsessive observer of skies, constantly sketching, constantly noting the skies as they changed. Nobody who hadn't done that would have had the confidence to paint something which looks like a hugely glowing, pulsating sunset, and yet when you actually look at the sun itself, the disk of the sun, it's a kind of dirty grey. It's not bright at all. The brightness comes from everywhere else in the picture. Using a technique called scumbling, Turner was able to infuse his dappled clouds with power and texture. He added layer after layer of weak, thin glaze before gently dragging the bright colours of a sunset across his canvas with a heavily laden brush, leaving parts of the underglaze still shining through. Right in the middle of the sunset, you have great lines of dark red and brown, very unexpected when you look at it closely, and yet the overall effect is a completely convincing, pulsating sunset. But while Turner had used his creative talent to depict what had been a real event, this isn't exactly an accurate record of the Temeraire's last voyage. In fact, Turner has used considerable artistic license. He always claimed that he'd seen the ship going by himself as it was going to be broken up, but that cannot be quite true, or if it is, he's deliberately changed what he remembered, because the real Temeraire at this point would have been a poor old wormy hulk, a great lump of rotting wood, not the beautifully accoutred ship that Turner has painted.
So we've got the ship painted looking like a ghost in beautiful white and gold, when actually it was yellow and black. He painted one tug leading it. There would have been two leading it. He moved the tug's funnel to the back so that the billowing smoke is almost heralding the ship behind it. The Temeraire itself has tall masts and some furled sails, which by the time it was being broken up, all that was chopped down to make it easier to be tugged along. So the whole image is fabricated.
He's painted the sunset in that painting, because a sunset in a painting, the narrative is that it's the end of something. Something's coming to close, like it's the end of the day. But the sunset is depicted on the wrong side of the painting. Turner artistically moved it over to the other side of the canvas. And why has he painted the moon in the painting as well at the same time? Well, sometimes you can see the moon in the early morning as well as the sunset. And other people say he painted it to show that time was passing, that it was almost like a funeral march, and slowly going through day and night with the sun and the moon, she was being brought into her final resting place.
The painting is very aesthetically pleasing and beautiful. It's a wonderful study in contrasts. On the one side, you have this beautiful silvery spectral ship illuminated by the moon, very quiet and very understated. And that contrasts beautifully with the explosion of flamboyant, energetic, fiery colour on the other side, the dynamics of the sun rising or setting.
But was this the sun setting on a past era, a Britain before steam? Much has been made of the new technology at the heart of this painting, the steam engine. And Turner must have had a keen sense of the Industrial Revolution which was then exploding all around him. Could the Fighting Temeraire be about how this new steam power was replacing the customs and the history of old?
On a simple level, it's very easy to read. You don't have to be a historian of 19th century art to be able to unpick the story of the sailing ship being towed by the steamship, and it's about one age passing into another. But that simplicity belies the very complex issues that Turner brings within it. And like all great works of art, it can be interpreted in different ways. So is it celebratory? Is it sad? Is it poignant? I think it's above all an image of hope.
A lot of people said, oh, this is an example of Turner's unhappy with the changing of era where you've got the great wooden walls of the Age of Sail being dragged to their death by steam power. In fact, you realise that one of the most beautifully painted bits of the entire painting is the steamer, it's the tug. And Turner is celebrating that tug. He's celebrating steam power. He's celebrating the new England as much as he's mourning the loss of the old.
But for Turner, it would be the public and the critical response to his painting that would really be crucial. The subject of Turner's most important painting was remaining relevant. But no matter how much he tapped into the public mood, there was a new problem looming on Turner's horizon. That problem was that Turner would be up against a host of contemporaries all competing for pride of place at the Royal Academy show, the best slot for the most important moment of the year. Turner knew that how his work was received at this prestigious event could make or break its wider reception. But Turner's luck hadn't run out quite yet. By 1839, the Royal Academy had moved into a space in the new National Gallery on the edge of Trafalgar Square. So Turner's painting of a heroic Napoleonic-era warship couldn't have had a better view. And Turner had one final trick up his sleeve. Not only was his painting to be displayed in a location essentially twinned to its subject matter, Trafalgar Story, Trafalgar Square, but Turner was also on the hanging committee that year as well, which meant he could choose the perfect position for his painting. This is an unprecedented tale of luck and good planning. There was literally nothing more that Turner could do. He had created a masterpiece, and to promote it, he had fired off every cannon he had. All he could do now was stand back and wait for the reception. J.M.W. Turner knew that he was painting his masterpiece, the Fighting Temeraire, in the last phase of his artistic life. He was in his mid-60s by the time he'd finished it, and just as the sun was setting in his hard-worked canvas, so it was on his brilliant career. The Royal Academy show could be the last chance to secure his legacy. In 1839, Turner's masterpiece was finally put on display here at the National Gallery in a space reserved for members of the Royal Academy for everyone to see. Alongside it, Turner placed an altered extract from Thomas Campbell's poem Ye Mariners of England, which read, "The flag which braved the battle and the breeze no longer owns her."
It's a combination of perfect factors. Turner's own very specific painterly style, the subject matter that he's best known for, but also this moment in time, the ethos that he's trying to capture. And above all, it is a picture about Britain. You look at the painting and you see a British ship. It's on a British river, the River Thames, the symbol of London. And of course, we also have the other great symbol of the nation at the time, the steamer, part of the age of steam, the Industrial Revolution, of which Britain is a world leader. Things which are important to the national agenda are encapsulated within this picture.
But would it be the hit that Turner craved? The answer is an emphatic yes. The Victorian public went crazy for it.
Turner's painting was rapturously received. If you read the reviews of his painting, people are realising they're actually seeing something that's never been done before. He's a genius, he's an innovator, and he's creating something fundamentally new.
People flocked to see it out of respect, not just to the painting, but to the history and to the members of their family that they'd lost. It was seen as majestic.
The Fighting Temeraire is universally beloved, and it's almost as though he's reached the epitome of his career with the Temeraire. It encapsulates all of the things that he's been working towards during his career.
The London that Turner grew up in might have been changing fast, and the country that had once embraced him as its finest artist might have started to look to the next generation coming up through the Academy. But just for this moment, old Turner had the nation in his hands. He was a patriotic man. The Temeraire was his personal tribute to the country he loved, and perhaps that's why, for the rest of his life, Turner never let this painting out of his sight.
Turner liked it so much, he had a pet name for it. He called it his darling, which I think is really sweet.
The love of Turner's life was the Fighting Temeraire. He didn't want to sell it, and when he was offered a cheque for £5,000, he still refused to sell it.
It's almost as much as the ship itself was sold for, and Turner turns this amount of money down, and even when he's offered a blank cheque, he still refuses to part with the picture. So clearly he recognises that this is a statement of a great importance for him as an artist.
Although Turner remained one of the most famous artists in England until his death, by the late 1830s, a new wave of younger painters were superseding him. And it hurt when his own evolving technique after the Temeraire, his radical old age, went unappreciated.
As time went on, he painted fewer details, more impasto, thicker paint, quicker brush marks, more of the atmosphere than the actual place. And quite a few people criticised this. They said, these aren't paintings. And he was angry, he was furious because he knew what he was doing and he was just moving art on. He'd done that at the beginning of his life. He'd painted the detailed works. Now he was painting atmosphere and light.
Turner had not devoted his entire life to art, just to be forgotten, and towards the end of his life, he made sure that neither he nor his paintings would fade into obscurity.
He wanted to leave a legacy for Britain, and he wrote in his will that he wanted all his works kept together and shown together.
Turner was obsessed with his legacy, and the last few years of his life, he made absolutely certain that his paintings were in the locations he wanted them to be in, framed in the way he wanted them framed, so they could be appreciated by the public in the way he wanted his paintings to be appreciated.
Turner died in his house on the banks of the Thames, the river he'd loved all his life, at the age of 76, on the 19th of December, 1851.
Turner's funeral was organised by his fellow academicians. His body lay in state in his gallery, and then it was taken and interred in no less a place than St Paul's Cathedral. I mean, what greater endorsement for national heroism is there? And you can find him there in the crypt today, lying next to Sir Joshua Reynolds, the first president of the Academy, which I think would have pleased Turner greatly, and also not that far from Lord Nelson.
They're lying almost side by side, and it wouldn't surprise me if he'd particularly asked for that to happen.
His will stipulated that the entire contents of his studio be left to the nation. That's nearly 300 oil paintings and more than 30,000 drawings and sketches, of which the most important is, of course, the Fighting Temeraire.
If you go and look at the Fighting Temeraire now in the National Gallery, it's Turner's gift to you from all of those years ago. So it hasn't been kept hidden away in the hands of a private collector. He painted it for the nation, he painted it for us.
Turner's name is as secure today as it was back then. If we see a particularly colourful, flamboyant, sun-drenched sky, we call it a Turner sunset, and I think that ties very clearly back to the fame of the Temeraire.
We love the Fighting Temeraire because it's a part of our history where we were heroic, where we defeated the enemy. It was not only Turner's darling, it was our darling.
There's only one place to end this story, and it's, of course, back here in the National Gallery, where Turner's darling is displayed permanently, just as he always wanted. Now, if this was simply disguised autobiography, we wouldn't love it so much. The truth is that Georgian Britain, the country that had fought the Napoleonic Wars, was not simply vanishing into the sunset, or if it was, then a new Britain, the much more vigorous, industrial, imperial, Victorian Britain, symbolised by that tugboat, was about to emerge. Yet there's no getting away from it. This is a fundamentally backward-looking, nostalgia-soaked image, and its popularity makes me ask, are we British basically still children of the sunset rather than of the dawn? Whether we are or not, we remain vigorously commercial and money-grubbing, which allows me to end this film in a way that Joseph Mallard William Turner would have been delighted with. Because here is the new British £20 note. And look who's on it. Yes, it's Turner. And look what's on it. Yes, it's the Fighting Temeraire. This is by far the most famous and the most loved image that Turner ever made. That sun may be low in the sky, but it has not set for nearly 200 years. Next time, there are people who think that great art should be like a warm bath. This is more like a barbed wire face mask. How one of the darkest events in Spanish history.
It's the catastrophe which alerts us to what modern warfare was going to look like.
Met a prolific artist's complicated love life.
He referred to women as either goddesses or doormats and weeping machines.
It could only be Pablo Picasso's Weeping Woman. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brainpower. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
His watercolours, described as miraculous, people can't believe the effects that he manages to achieve.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? The Louvre, the biggest and the most famous art gallery in the world. It's a colossal museum covering an area larger than 10 football pitches, holding an extraordinary collection of around 5,000 paintings and nearly 500,000 objects. Every year it's visited by nearly 10 million people. If they all came on the same day, the queue here would stretch to Moscow. But although these buildings are stuffed with tip-top masterpieces, 8 out of 10 people queuing are here to see just one thing. The Louvre's most famous portrait, probably the world's most famous portrait, the Mona Lisa. It's an iconic work of art, once valued at $650 million, but truly, it's priceless. Well, here we are at last, just the two of us, Andrew and Mona. And that is a fantastic privilege, because most of the time, Mona Lisa is facing an endless, snaking queue of admirers shuffling forward for their 15 seconds in front of her, mobile phone in hand, before they have to leave again. What can be seen or selfied is a plainly dressed, enigmatic young woman apparently sitting in front of a mountainous view, all of it demanding close inspection. But I can't get too close, of course, because Mona Lisa is protected by an enormously tough glass box. She is better protected than any celebrity or modern president, and quite right too. She has her own temperature inside there to keep the painting as perfectly as it can be kept after all this time. Now, in a better ordered world, there are other Leonardos which I think deserve to be just as famous. There is a fabulous drawing in the National Gallery in London, for instance, of the Virgin and Child with St. Anne, which is endlessly mysterious and haunting and utterly, utterly ravishing. Then there's another portrait, Lady with an Ermine, which is brighter coloured and much more instantly grabby than this one. And yet it is her smile, her gaze, which has held the entire world mesmerised for decades. So what is it about this picture which has won hearts all over the world? Because in the end, it's just a portrait. A young woman twists her head towards us, peering out of a smoky landscape through cracks and darkened varnish. And that's about it. And yet, she is magnetic. In the flesh, she is captivating. So what's her secret? Or rather, what was Leonardo da Vinci's secret? Well, to unfold the tale of this painting and the astonishing man who created it, we must swap the centre of Western art in the 21st century for the most humming, fashionable and culturally swaggering city of the 15th, the birthplace of the biggest artistic revolution the West has ever seen, Renaissance Florence.
A visitor to Florence in 1459 said Florence is paradise on earth. It was a very prosperous city, but it was also a city with intellectual and cultural life. People enthused about how the Florentines had created a new golden age through painting, through music, through architecture. And so Florence was really a kind of crucible of a new kind of modern life or a new approach to culture.
Whether you were an artist or whether you were a scholar, whether you were interested in the sciences, it was all happening at the same time. It was like the centre of the universe.
Renaissance simply means rebirth, a return to the glory days of ancient Greece and Rome. Multi-talented and brilliant minds were drawn here like bees to a flower garden. But in a city of 70,000 people, there was one person who really represents what we now mean by the term Renaissance man. Leonardo da Vinci, the man who painted the Mona Lisa, was born nearby in April 1452.
He came from a two-horse town, or maybe a one-horse town, called Vinci. It's about 20 miles from Florence. His family were small-time landowners, not incredibly rich. His father was a notary, a lawyer, making his living in Florence. He's listed in his grandfather's tax return. He's listed as a bocca, a mouth, which is rather a nice thing to call your kids their mouths, so they eat a lot of food.
From a very early age, Da Vinci was extremely intelligent, and he went to a very good school, and he showed a great love of anything visual, and he would go out sketching, and apparently he drew with his right hand and wrote with his left hand. You know, so you can imagine him with being so inspired and not wanting to waste a moment that he would be sort of going like this.
His family took note of this precocious ability.
They saw that he had a talent for drawing, and he produced a whole book of drawings, and later on his father took him to Florence to a great artist of the time, Verrocchio, and said, look at these drawings, my son did it, and apparently Verrocchio was just dumbfounded. So I've never seen drawings like this. Are you sure this is your son, and how old is he, and send him to me at once.
For the teenage Leonardo, this apprenticeship with Verrocchio was like a child footballer being coached by Pep Guardiola. A huge opportunity to learn from the formidable Verrocchio.
He's an interesting artist, a major sculptor. His studio produced paintings, and he used senior assistants often to produce the paintings. Visitors to Florence may notice that on top of the cathedral dome, built by Brunelleschi, the great architect, there's a very big bronze ball, and Verrocchio put that up there.
During the nearly 11 years that Leonardo was his student, Verrocchio worked to polish the young man's obvious artistic skills and draw out his immense natural talent. This meant working together on a huge range of commissions from the church and important Florentine families. A major artist in his own right, Verrocchio must have guessed that his student would one day surpass him. But just how soon would that be?
Verrocchio used all of the young painters very wisely in his workshop productions. And one of these paintings is the Baptism of Christ, now in the Uffizi in Florence. And he told Leonardo da Vinci to paint one of the angels in the work, an angel in the lower left-hand corner of the painting.
You look at that angel, the draperies are amazing, the hair is absolutely fantastic. It's very urgent kind of expression, and it seems almost certain that Leonardo did all the fancy oil painting finish in this picture. And the story of one of his biographers is that from that point onwards, Verrocchio said, "I'll never touch a brush again."
From the very beginning, Leonardo was regarded as an unparalleled genius. At the remarkably tender age of 20, the man who would paint the Mona Lisa qualified as a master craftsman, and 6 years later he received his first solo commission to paint an altarpiece for his local chapel. In gossipy Florence, his reputation was spreading. But this wasn't down to hard graft or even innate skill. When we talk of genius, in Leonardo's case, that meant a hungry appetite for all kinds of knowledge: mathematics, poetry, engineering, hydraulics, optics, measurements of all kinds. And it was his frankly gruesome experiments in anatomy that provide one of the clues to his painting of the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa might be familiar, but she can bring you to your knees. The pride and joy of the world's biggest art gallery, the Louvre. This is the most recognizable painting in the world, produced by history's most influential artist. In all of art history, there has never been anybody remotely like Leonardo da Vinci. Right from the first, when he was apprenticed as a teenager into a workshop, everyone around him thought he was something special. His services were in hot demand from bishops, rival rulers, and the new rich. For the first 30 years of his career, Leonardo moved restlessly through the major cities of northern Italy, most notably Florence, Venice, and Milan, traveling wherever commissions and his curiosity took him.
He had such a short attention span that nowadays they would have said he had ADHD, which fits really because he was always looking for a new inspiration.
This was an artist who really didn't think or paint like any of his contemporaries. Every time he learned something new, he applied it immediately to his latest work.
Leonardo was restlessly experimental, and one of the things that he very quickly became interested in was oil paint, which was a new technology, and he began experimenting with it.
You could create highlights, you could create luster, you could create transparency, you could do veils, you could do atmosphere in the landscape. So he was a great pioneer of oil painting and, in fact, pushed the technique further than anyone had done to that point.
Using this newly developed skill with oil paints, Leonardo created a whole series of works. In 1482, he made Adoration of the Magi. In 1483, The Virgin on the Rocks, and in 1494 he was commissioned by the Duke of Milan to paint The Last Supper for the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie. What makes this so revolutionary is not the paint he used, but Da Vinci's first brilliant use of perspective, making a two-dimensional image look three-dimensional. In the history of art, his use of perspective was a radical jump, a different way of thinking that would shape also how he approached the Mona Lisa.
Leonardo was extremely ambitious as a young painter, and one of the things he was very interested in was the application of geometry and mathematics to painting, specifically to create perspective. And so he worked at making his works look more realistic than any painters had done before by creating a kind of three-dimensional image on the two-dimensional plane.
Leonardo's interpretation of the evening before Christ was betrayed by one of his disciples was a monumental undertaking for an ambitious young artist. His experiments with paint mean it hasn't aged well, but his use of perspective made him famous.
The status as an artist in the Renaissance period changed very sharply. Artists acquired pretensions, they acquired a theory of perspective and proportions, and they then claimed to be a liberal art, that is to say, one of the higher intellectual arts.
And this raises the profile of artists and gives them a kind of prominence that they did not have in previous decades or centuries. And what we have then happening is artists become like rock stars.
This was a time that propelled the artist to great stature and celebrity status. If we would have had I'm a Celebrity, they would have been there. It's a time when artists were seen as sort of like mini gods. You know, they had a God-given talent.
Leonardo was a household name elsewhere in Italy, but he'd been away from Florence for 30 years. So when he returned to his hometown in 1500, he needed to establish a reputation here. But first, Leonardo needed somewhere to base himself. Maria Wellington Gatan is a doctor of Renaissance studies.
We're here at the Santissima Annunziata Square with the church sanctuary of Santissima Annunziata behind us. This is thought to be the place where Leonardo first was housed when he came to Florence in 1500. Leonardo's father was a notary for the friars. One could easily imagine that with his connections that he helped Leonardo arrange this housing, because of course Leonardo hadn't been in Florence for the past couple of decades. When Leonardo came to Florence, he came without commissions. So he was looking for work. He certainly would have been interested in painting portraits of the Florentine upper and middle classes.
With a host of potential clients, Leonardo would begin work on the portrait that would define his entire career. But the mystery, for many centuries, was who exactly it was that he'd painted.
The commission for the Mona Lisa has various stories, and each of them are fascinating.
I suppose the most fashionable in the last sort of 20 years of the daft ideas is that this is Leonardo's pupil, Salai, this rascally but rather handsome pupil with curly hair, that it's a portrait of Salai in drag.
Some people said she was his mother. Some people said she was the Virgin Mary or the Duchess of Milan.
Some people say it's a self-portrait of him whilst he's dealing with his homosexual tendencies, and at that time being a homosexual was against the law.
It seems that this extraordinary picture must have an extraordinary explanation, but in fact this extraordinary picture has a sober explanation.
And the sober answer to the mystery is found in where Leonardo was living and in his father's business relationships.
Also connected with the Santissima Annunziata is Francesco del Giocondo. He was a silk merchant in Florence, and we know that he and Leonardo's father knew each other and that they had had business dealings with each other. And so one could very easily imagine Leonardo's father suggesting perhaps that Francesco commissioned a portrait of his wife, Lisa, from Leonardo.
That this was the case was proved beyond doubt in 2005, when a German librarian found a note written by one of Leonardo's contemporaries, wondering if he would leave the portrait of Francesco del Giocondo's wife, Lisa Gherardini, unfinished. So what do we know about her? She was only 24. She was the wife of a fairly wealthy trader in silks and fabrics, and possibly also in slaves, who was himself a client of Leonardo's father, a notary or lawyer. So they knew the family. It's said that Leonardo used acrobats and musicians and clowns to keep Mona smiling, because it's difficult when you're painting somebody to avoid their face becoming rather frozen with concentration. But if you look closely at her smile, I don't think it's an amused smile particularly. I think it's a sardonic, knowing smile. This is somebody who is staring at us just as hard as we are all staring at her. Perhaps she'd guessed just how long it would take Leonardo to finish his painting of her. After starting in 1503, he never stopped working on this modestly sized rectangle. His magpie mind was far too restless.
He was what I would call a helicopter painter. He hovered endlessly over works of art. He said, art is never finished, only abandoned. You really had to prize a work of art out of his hands.
He was always on the go, always looking for different things. Shall I invent this? Shall I paint that? And that would have been part of his restlessness and also part of his inquiring mind and also his needing and his desire to think outside of the box.
Leonardo's thirst for knowledge was never just confined to painting. He made himself expert in chemistry, botany, mathematics, engineering, music, astronomy, and map-making. But it was another of his obsessions, knowing how things worked, that's the key to the enigma of the Mona Lisa.
Leonardo was one of history's greatest anatomical illustrators, and probably the best, in fact. That was how you would make your reputation in art, by creating very realistic-looking figures that had tremendous anatomical accuracy. And so Leonardo embraced that innovation in painting, and like so many things that he did, took it to the next level. And in fact, he said that anatomy is for a painter what grammar is for a writer. This is the structure on which you build.
The study of anatomy is as old as medicine itself. It was revered in ancient Greece. But in Leonardo's Italy, it seemed new and vaguely sinister. Artists were just starting to see the value of knowing how the human body works by observing the dissection of corpses. Leonardo inevitably went further. He wanted to cut the bodies up with his own hands. In this hospital, the Santa Maria Nuova, even while painting the Mona Lisa, he was likely to be found alongside the working doctors. Maria Antonia Rinaldi is a lecturer in art history.
Leonardo wrote generically that here in the hospital he did 30 dissections. He wrote about the dissection of an old man Actually, the old man told to Leonardo that he was more than 100 years old, and Leonardo said he passed away in such a serene way that I wanted to understand the reason of such a dolce morte, sweet death. But Leonardo was also interested in trying to understand how the man functioned. The man as a machine, to understand the movement, but then also to understand really how the human being functions.
Leonardo thought that only by knowing exactly what was under Lisa's skin could he begin to capture her essence in paint.
He wanted to see how the muscles were connected to the sinews, to the cartilage, to the bones.
He would not see the dissection as influencing art or art as influencing dissection. He saw them as the same thing in a way. It's a much deeper aspiration for understanding the body than most artists.
This wasn't CSI Florence taking place in a spotlessly hygienic pathologist's lab. To create the Mona Lisa, Leonardo needed to withstand an assault on all the senses.
Leonardo talked about the difficulties in dissecting the body, and he talked about how fast the body decomposed.
There are no preservatives, and this is really gory. You start with the intestines and the abdomen because it decays very quickly. You go to the chest and the brain decays pretty quickly, and the muscles you can leave for a bit later, and the skeleton even later than that. So, yeah, Leonardo writes passionately saying, you know, you've got to have great patience and so on, but you've also got to put up with the sheer unpleasantness of it.
It was a gooey unpleasantness that Leonardo was happy to endure in pursuit of understanding and perfecting his portrait.
He talks about how awful it is to spend the night with these dead men who've been flayed of their skins. And so there are these horrible specters peering out at Leonardo, we have to imagine. But clearly, he was committed to this kind of anatomical study.
He saw painting as remaking nature. So to remake nature, you had to understand nature, not just what something looks like on the surface, but you had to understand what was going on inside.
His curiosity, his appetite of understanding, learning, with such an attention to the detail that his anatomical studies are quite perfect.
Leonardo made reams of notes and drawings about his discoveries, obsessed by the inner workings of the human body. That smile, where exactly were the muscles that moved the mouth and the lips? And how did they combine? For Leonardo, his scientific experiments and his artistic endeavors were inseparable. He was the great connector. There was no reason to keep science and art separate in this life. And so, instead, Leonardo combined the two disciplines. He applied everything he was learning about human anatomy to his art. In this case, the face of the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa is the most iconic and most recognizable portrait in the world, the work of an artist of undisputed genius, Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was much more than an artist. His insatiable appetite for knowledge of all available kinds spread far beyond the canvas. He was fascinated by things as diverse as mathematics, optics, anatomy, and in particular, human dissection. And quite rightly, he could never separate the science from the art, so that everything he learned in the morgue turned up eventually on the canvas. There aren't many paintings that more or less everyone in the Western world can describe, and analysing it is a joy because Leonardo's extraordinary talent shines through. But once you know that his love of dissection helped to create that famous face, it's hard to see it in quite the same way again. One of the great things about Leonardo is that his drawings and his notebooks show us his mind actually working. And so when we say, oh, he learned from optics in the painting, what exactly do we mean? Well, take the very famous case of the way that Mona Lisa's eyes appear to follow you around the room. That is because the pupil in one eye is looking directly at the viewer and the pupil in the other eye is slightly off kilter, and that gives the illusion. It became very, very famous. So famous, it's known as the Mona Lisa effect, but it's pure optics. Really close attention to detail produces mystery. Take the case of Mona Lisa's famous smile. Now, if you look directly at her, she doesn't seem to be smiling at all. But if you glance to one side, she does seem to be smiling. And that is because of sfumato, this famous smoky technique that Leonardo uses right at the corner of her lips.
After cutting up eyes and studying optical theory, Leonardo recognized that vision is only sharp when we look at things straight on. The eyes can be fooled. By painting extraordinarily fine downward lines at the corners of her lips, he creates the effect. She isn't smiling. Let your gaze widen and the lips blur. The corners appear to lift, her lips change shape. She is smiling.
It's almost invisible, and yet it produces the illusion of a mobile, smiling mouth.
There's no hard outlines in the Mona Lisa's face. They're all blurred, so it gives the sense that she's moving. And also, she's not painted directly onto you. She's at an angle. And because she's at an angle, she's showing that she's moving and also showing that she's occupying a three-dimensional space.
I think he was rather pleased when people picked up what he was doing. This very daring recipe of the slightly sideways pose, the direct look. In most cases with female portraits, it was not polite for a woman to engage in eye contact with a man. So you had downcast eyes, you were in profile if you did a portrait. Leonardo breaks that convention.
Leonardo's painting was the closest thing to naturalism that portraiture had yet seen. This was a picture soaked in understanding.
Every part of this canvas, from the corkscrew shine of her hair to the details on Mona Lisa's robe.
All of those things were achieved by a minute attention to detail. This is, of course, a still image, but she is alive.
After spending more than 4 years toiling on this masterpiece, constantly reworking it, changing and tweaking wherever he saw fit, technically, Leonardo was finished, but he would not let it go.
It was very typical of Da Vinci not to finish a work of art. He never felt that he'd made it good enough. He always felt there was more to do, and just change this bit and that bit. A lot of artists have this problem, especially if you're a perfectionist, as he was. The family who commissioned the Mona Lisa never got the painting, but they never paid the money either.
As Leonardo kept it with him, few people ever had the chance to see the Mona Lisa, certainly until it went on display in the 19th century. But a small number of Leonardo's contemporaries did get to see her up close and personal, and the impact on them was seismic.
Immediately, the Mona Lisa influenced the way that artists were working at the time.
The artist who probably had the most profound reaction to Leonardo was young Raphael. Raphael painted these two aristocrats, Angelo and Maddalena Doni, and she is absolutely in the pose of Mona Lisa, but doesn't smile.
He clearly had seen the Mona Lisa and could not have painted Maddalena without having seen this work of art. And likewise, as later with the unicorn, is almost a complete copy of the Mona Lisa. And so this becomes transformative in portraiture as painters now begin doing their versions of the Mona Lisa.
It may have changed the history of portraiture, but Leonardo was failing to leave his masterpiece alone. Over the next decade, he continued to tweak and finesse it.
An indication of the importance of the Mona Lisa to Leonardo is the fact that he kept it with him throughout the rest of his life. It was something that he really believed was one of the finest expressions of his brush, and he could not let it go. It was something he still wanted to perfect.
Consequently, the image we know and see today is quite different to the original portrait and may indeed be unrecognizable as Lisa del Giocondo.
It's clear from the technical analysis we can now see a lot of the underdrawing. She started off with an orthodox Tuscan dress, and it gradually matured into something which was very decorative with the twisted shawl and so on. And she's put in front of this very remarkable landscape. So it's clear that the portrait becomes what I call a universal picture. Leonardo is pouring knowledge into it about light, about anatomy, about psychology, about geology. Now, nobody much was interested in Lisa del Giocondo outside the family. So it ceases to become a mugshot and becomes something much more universal.
In 1517, with the Mona Lisa nearly always at hand, the 65-year-old Leonardo became an eminent figure in the King of France's court.
He went to work for Francis I. Now, for Francis was trying to buy into the Italian Renaissance. It was the latest thing, and he got the top striker, as it were. Leonardo was expected to do things, but he was a kind of ornament of the court. He had a huge salary, big salary, much bigger than even most courtiers and most civil servants would have had.
But Leonardo would only serve the king for 2 short years. He died in Amboise, in the Loire Valley, in 1519. It's said that he passed away in the arms of the king himself, who was devastated by his death.
Leonardo da Vinci was one of the greatest painters in Europe at this point, and so his death was widely mourned.
And we can say, yes, he finished not many paintings, but he finished the world's most famous painting, the world's second most famous painting, the Last Supper, and the world's most famous drawing, the man in the square and the circle, based upon the writings of the Roman architect Vitruvius. And when people say to me he didn't finish much, I said, well, he finished these 3 most famous things, and that's not bad.
When Leonardo died, the Mona Lisa was bought by the French royal family, and for the next 278 years was moved around among their numerous palaces. It was only ever seen by France's rulers and their most valued courtiers. Finally, in 1797, Leonardo's painting made its way here to the Louvre, where it was displayed with the rest of the former royal collection. And for 114 years, that's where it stayed. To most of its visitors, it was just one more portrait hanging in a crowded gallery. Its place in the world's cultural landscape was frankly about as big as the space it took up on the wall of the Louvre. That is, until the 21st of August 1911, when the painting simply disappeared. Nowadays, people all over the world can identify the Mona Lisa at a glance. It is unquestionably the most famous portrait ever created, endlessly reproduced, and hugely influential all over the globe. But the Mona Lisa's worldwide fame only really began in the 20th century, in 1911, when she made headlines around the globe after she disappeared overnight, upped and offed from her home here in the Louvre. It's a hard-to-believe tale, and it begins on the evening of the 21st of August. With no security measures but locked doors, the Louvre's 400 rooms were guarded by just a handful of men, and none of them saw Leonardo's masterpiece vanish into thin air.
No one noticed for 28 hours that the Mona Lisa was not on the wall.
Paintings were often being removed to be photographed, so that's what staff assumed was happening to the Mona Lisa.
When they discovered it was missing, of course it became enormous news.
Journalists couldn't get enough of the story. Karine Friedberger, a specialist in the history of art, is at the French National Library.
This newspaper is called Le Petit Parisien, and the title says this famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci, La Joconde, Mona Lisa, has disappeared from the Louvre Museum. How? Since when? We don't know. We only have the frame left. And then it takes us through the shock of the personnel in the Louvre Museum, finding this empty space and wondering who could have had access.
Now, for the first time, anyone who bought a newspaper knew about the Mona Lisa. The Louvre was closed for 9 days, and when it reopened, something rather extraordinary happened.
The public reaction was just astonishing. People would queue for hours and hours to go into the Louvre, but they couldn't see the Mona Lisa because it had been stolen, but they just wanted to see the wall space where the Mona Lisa was once hanging.
More people came to see the missing Mona Lisa than actually had been coming to see the Mona Lisa herself in the years before that.
They left offerings by it and notes. People wept when they saw that it wasn't there. It became a bit hysterical.
No one was arrested and charged, and there were no clues to follow. The Paris police force's reputation plummeted. But, by contrast, her disappearance turbocharged the Mona Lisa's fame.
One of the things that happened in the aftermath of the theft is that the Paris police put the Mona Lisa's image, thousands of them, on every street corner in the city. And it gave an incredibly wide exposure to the painting.
This very quickly became a worldwide story. And it so happens that the postcard sellers outside the Louvre made quite a lot of money selling those postcards to visitors who were coming to see the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, and since it wasn't there, they were actually buying the postcards.
And while no end of reproductions were being made, the enigmatic original remained lost. 2 years passed, and hope for her return was fading. Then, out of the blue, in 1913, a letter found its way to the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, signed Leonardo, and offering to sell the Mona Lisa. The Uffizi's director agreed to meet Leonardo, and in a sting operation, the police swooped and arrested him. The seller's real name was Vincenzo Perugia.
Perugia, an Italian worker who was working at the time in the Louvre, hated the fact that the French had one of Italy's greatest paintings, and it was his prime desire to return it back to Italy. So he went in one night after work, dressed as a workman, and while nobody was about, he took it off the wall and he took it home.
His argument was that he was an Italian patriot and he was returning this painting to the land of its birth because of the fact that he said Napoleon had stolen it from the Italians, which of course did not happen. It traveled to France in the baggage of Leonardo da Vinci himself.
Perugia pleaded guilty to theft, and he served 8 months in prison. With the thief imprisoned and a now world-famous Mona Lisa on her way home, all of Paris was jubilant.
Once it was found and it was brought back, there was like a huge city party, huge carnival.
It's been said that in bars across Paris, can-can girls performed dressed as the Mona Lisa.
People dusted their faces with yellow paint, people shaved their eyebrows and made their hairline bigger to look like the Mona Lisa.
Back in the Louvre, the Mona Lisa's place in the history of art had been secured forever.
And she became a celebrity, even so much so that even now the Mona Lisa has her own postbox, allegedly. She gets mail.
And that new global fame made the Mona Lisa into the Marilyn of the early 20th century. A new cultural icon had been born. Everyone wanted to see the small, famous painting in the flesh, and her travels on loan abroad were treated like a royal tour, prompting a semi-hysteria wherever she went.
Now, as befits a lady more renowned than any queen, Mona Lisa leaves the Louvre under heavy guard for a trip to the United States.
Whenever the French government needed a little hand with some foreign relations, the Mona Lisa could be lent out to help oil the wheels.
No VIP has been surrounded by more security. The Secret Service has been ordered to stand guard over the lady with the enigmatic smile 24 hours a day.
While she was on display in New York, nearly 2 million people queued to get a 20-second or so glimpse of her. Similar numbers flocked to see her wherever she went in the world before officially retiring, exhausted, to the Louvre in 1974, where she's remained its biggest attraction ever since.
Mona Lisa is the best-known image in the world. There really is no rival. I've seen her twice out of the frame, and it has a kind of living presence. It has a sort of breathing presence. This sounds very pretentious, but there's no other way to describe it.
It's quite incredible that she remains up there, bigger than any other work of art. Nothing has usurped her. She's remained the greatest celebrity portrait that we know.
That's the extraordinary draw of the Mona Lisa. She's a global phenomenon, seems to smile at everyone, wherever they are, all over the world.
The Mona Lisa just does not belong to the Louvre and the French state or to Leonardo da Vinci. The Mona Lisa belongs to the world. This is part of the cultural heritage of all of us because it's such a wonderful work of art.
The story of the Mona Lisa and Leonardo da Vinci, the genius who painted her, has blockbuster bestseller dimensions. The autopsy, the optics, the explosion of new thinking in Renaissance Italy, a gay artist's decade-long obsession with a 24-year-old girl, her journey across the Alps to France, the theft, the return, the global fame. It is all a great story, but frankly, it means nothing compared to this, the fact that the hairs on the back of your neck stand up in her presence, that gaze, that smile. Fundamentally, this is not a portrait of a particular person. This is a picture of humanity by one of art's great geniuses, clothed in beauty and brimming with inner mystery. It may be dark, it may be old, it may be quite small, and it may be over-familiar, but it is without doubt one of the world's great paintings. Next time on the world's greatest paintings, a canvas so blindingly famous it sets the National Gallery ablaze. This is one of the brightest pictures you will ever see. This is a story of heroic optimism.
Nobody had ever done anything quite that wild.
Loneliness.
His family, I think, started to realise the madness had begun.
And heartbreak.
He thought it was going to be a whole new beginning for him. And of course, it wasn't to be.
Behind Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turners Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? Paris isn't simply the capital of France, it is the artistic capital of the world. For centuries, this city has been a kind of buzzing hive of the West's cultural and artistic development, home to thriving communities of go-ahead artists and some of the world's most important artworks. Amidst the hustle of Paris, art is everywhere. Good art, not so good art. But there is one modestly sized gallery hiding something sensational. The Musée de l'Orangerie, built as a hothouse for oranges and lemons, holds one of the most extraordinary works that has ever been made. These rooms are the Sistine Chapel of Impressionism, and these are Claude Monet's water lilies. I've come here again and again, and I've been moved to tears almost every time. No artist had ever attempted to capture the rippling, heartbreaking evanescence of life like this, and no one has come close ever since. It's a 360-degree immersion into the glittering waterscape of a different and a better world. There are 8 of these huge curved panels, and standing in this room, you are surrounded by them. It is an almost hallucinatory feeling. You have different moods and colors of the sky, wind scudding across the water, different times of the day. And it's very hard to know how close to stand to these pictures as well, because to really see any of them, you have to go to the far side of the room and look back from a long distance. And yet, to properly understand them, you almost need your nose rubbing up against the canvas so that you can see the blistered, scrumbled, erupting and falling effect of Monet's extraordinary paintwork, the fruit of many, many decades of arduous study. These were the last works Monet produced, working relentlessly for 12 years. With them, he created a vision of life that still speaks clearly over a century after his oil paint first dried. More than 1 million people come into these rooms for that sense of serenity, and they walk out feeling calm and serene and reassured about the world, which is exactly not the story of the origin of the pictures. Behind these giant canvases, there lies a story of personal tragedy, of a brutal war, and a tormented man with a final, insatiable obsession. Claude Monet was born in Paris in 1840. His father wanted him to go into the family grocery business, but it wasn't for Monet.
He spent a lot of time out of doors, which is what fueled his passion for nature. And he was a brilliant caricaturist, and he was always, as a young age, drawing people.
Monet was a rebel right from the start, a man destined to change French painting forever. Using new, industrially made, easy-to-carry paints, he developed a fresh way of painting outside, trying to snatch fast-changing light and color. Like an athlete against the clock, he worked with a frantic urgency, desperate to catch a moment before it vanished forever.
He would go out to the riverbank, set up and begin capturing very quickly the scene that he saw in front of him, catching the interplay between light and shadow, capturing how the light changed and getting this very immediate image.
He was concerned with visual sensation, something that is almost an emotional response to a scene.
But this style of painting ran counter to the art establishment around him.
You see the type of painting that was in fashion, very grand, serious, that today we dismiss as bordering on the sentimental.
Painters were still doing mythological scenes or doing scenes from the Bible or from French national history, Joan of Arc, for example. And there was an appeal for painters to paint modern life. Monet really was the one who maybe took it to the next level.
In 1874, Monet and a like-minded group of hairy young radicals had their first exhibition to showcase this new artistic movement.
Monet's contribution was a beautiful painting entitled Impression: Sunrise.
It was a dawn scene of fishing boats in the harbor, and he did it very quickly, probably painted it in the course of a morning or even less than that.
It does just give a suggestion of what's happening. The shadow of the boats on the water, so different from everything that had gone before.
But unfortunately for Monet, who was struggling to provide for his young family, the reviews of the exhibition were utterly damning.
Most people thought they were sketches made in preparation for something that was going to come after.
There is shock, surprise, hostility.
The critics said, do not go and see this work. It's the work of madmen. It's bad for your health. There was a health warning.
One also said they are impressionists in that they do not reproduce a landscape, but convey the impression it makes.
That is what gives birth to the name Impressionism. It wasn't a name that they chose themselves. It was a name that a critic gave them.
And yet in these early works, with their immediacy, their freshness, you can see the stirrings of what was to come. His art might hover over the calm tranquility of nature, an art of gardens, rivers and meadows, but as Monet fought to make it, he was an increasingly tormented figure.
He would physically attack his canvas. He would take a penknife and slash it. He would stamp up and down on his canvases. He would put his foot through it. And he would also set fire to them. People would arrive and witness a kind of bonfire of the canvases as all of the work that he'd been doing for the past day or two went up in smoke.
To develop, Monet would need to get closer to the source of his inspiration, to look ever deeper, to stare ever harder. Although Monet's career was forged here, in the heart of Paris, his own heart was always somewhere else. And in 1883, in middle age, he decided to make a momentous move, which would change the paintings he made for the rest of his life. And it would mark the beginning of an obsession that would lead him to the creation of his monumental water lilies. Claude Monet's grand decorations are a unique masterpiece, a collection of 8 vast panels sweeping across 2 oval rooms. These canvases are the culmination of a nearly 4-decade-long obsession. Water lilies, which in French are called nymphias or nymphs, have become as associated with Monet as, for instance, sunflowers with Van Gogh. And just as those sunflowers would be inspired by Van Gogh's move to the country, so it would be for Monet and his beloved lilies. In 1883, Monet arrived in the small village of Giverny and fell in love with a pink farmhouse, whose woodwork he painted a bright green. This would become a home for him and his growing family for the rest of his life. Plunging into its large, overgrown garden, he could shape nature to feed his art. At Giverny, it's hard to spot where the gardening ends and oil painting starts.
The only time he found he was happy was when he was surrounded by nature and colour.
He planted everything very consciously and created a kind of canvas, a living canvas that he could paint.
And alongside his studio and his work, this would become a busy family home. Monet lived here with his 2 children, Michel and Jean, and, after the death of his first wife, his new love, Alice Ochdet, and her 6 children. His great-grandson, Philippe Piguet, remembers visiting the house as a young boy.
Nous venions souvent ici, tantôt pour venir chercher des œufs du poulailler, tantôt pour aller pêcher avec mon frère au bassin. Ou bien alors il y avait un autre jeu qui nous plaisait beaucoup, c'était de jouer dans le grand atelier des nymphéas. On s'amusait comme des fous, on était gamins.
The house and gardens that would become Monet's inspiration, his refuge, have remained today exactly as they were when he lived here.
Nous sommes ici dans la salle à manger de Claude Monet. C'est une salle à manger que je connais bien. Petit, j'ai mangé à cette table. C'est là où se tenaient les repas familiaux, famille assez nombreuse, puisque Monet s'est installé ici à Giverny avec ses 2 enfants et avec Alice Hochdé et ses 6 enfants.
It was the beginning of an extraordinarily productive decade. Monet's obsession with nature led to the creation of some of the most famous Impressionist paintings ever produced. From the coast of Normandy to the boulevards of Paris, from cathedrals to cornfields, Monet chose images which spoke to the French people. His painting broke boundaries all the time and was often revolutionary, but above all, he was intensely patriotic. And the world quite quickly caught up with his vision. The artist who'd once been so readily dismissed began to find himself highly in demand.
After the late 1880s, certainly through the 1890s, for the rest of his life, he was really #1. He was extremely popular with the critics, with the public. He was described as having the greatest eye in the history of art, this marvelous gift of the gods. And so it's not just that his prices are very high. He was the most famous painter in the world.
Monet's career flourished. So did his finances. By the 1890s, he had 8 gardeners, and in 1893, he embarked on the project that would come to define him for the rest of his life. His water lily pond.
He had water siphoned off from the river into his garden pond, and this Japanese bridge over it.
He planted irises and tulips, forget-me-nots, roses and wisteria, but it was the water lilies that would win his heart. Finally, he had the perfect subject for his obsession with light, movement and color.
Il se lève tôt le matin, très tôt. Il prend un bon petit déjeuner et il est au travail dès 8 heures du matin jusqu'à midi. À midi, c'est le déjeuner. On se retrouve en famille, on prend le café, et puis ensuite, à 14 heures, il retourne à l'atelier travailler. Et il revient vers 18 heures, mais il se couche très tôt. Parce que, comme on le dit, qu'est-ce que vous voulez que je fasse une fois que le soleil est couché?
In a letter, Monet wrote, "All at once I had the revelation how wonderful my pond was, and I reached for my palette, and I've hardly had any other subject since that moment." This was his passion project. Over the next 2 decades, he created around 250 canvases of the same pond, unaware that they'd become the inspiration for his great masterpiece to come. I've always been fascinated by this extraordinary and evolving body of work. Monet painted his water lily pond in every season, every time of the day, every kind of weather. He was obsessed by trying to paint what, strictly speaking, can't be painted. Movement. He was trying to capture the unstoppable shifts of light and colour on the surface of the water, what you might call the flicker of the real. Monet's brushwork changed with almost every piece, ranging from bold dashes and confident flourishes to gentle, fluid strokes. At times, he used a palette knife, building up layers to create the illusion of vegetation. 250 paintings of the same thing. Everyone is completely different. And you know, it's not just the time of day or the weather that makes them different.
it's the mood as well. So there are kind of dreamy, languorous moments, saturated in light violets and purples. And then there are other paintings which are almost hallucinogenic, as if he was on some kind of drugs. The colours are so strange and so intense and so bright. You think, what was going on there? Nothing has ever looked like that. And there are others, again, where there's just a joyous, gentle, youthful, kind of exuberant, almost adolescent sense of colour. Bright blues, bright whites and reds, just something that makes you feel happy. For more than 20 years, Monet had lived a quiet but intensely productive life, hidden away from prying eyes, making paintings of his pond, his garden, and his family. But then in 1911, this quiet seclusion was brutally ended.
In 1910, Elise was diagnosed with leukemia, and she died in May of 1911. Monet understandably was devastated. Elise truly was the love of his life. And in his letters to his friends, he would say, "I am annihilated. The painter in me is dead, and all that remains is the inconsolable husband."
Cette photo est une photo qui représente Alice Monet. Elle est datée de 1910, un an avant la mort. C'est une photo que ses enfants lui ont donnée pour qu'il ait un souvenir de sa femme.
She'd looked after him, she'd been his housekeeper, she'd been his beloved wife. Real love affair, and he just gave up.
More bad news followed. When he finally turned back to painting, he had to accept he could barely see.
His vision had started to become extremely blurred. This, for an artist, was devastating.
And he really felt that this was now going to mark the end of his career.
Monet had developed a cataract in his right eye. The old painter's misfortunes were piling up, and in 1914 he was dealt the cruelest blow of all. His beloved son, Jean, who was just 46, died.
When his son passed away, he took it very badly. It broke him.
He was completely despondent and despairing, probably at his lowest.
He became so depressed that he stopped painting. He couldn't pick up a paintbrush.
And so at the age of 73, after having bestrode the art world for decades at this point, Monet was downing tools.
To him, paint and colour was life, and he was too depressed to go into the studio and paint. He wanted to stay in the sadness so that he could fully mourn for the family that he'd lost.
For more than 60 years, Monet had made art continuously. But now, as grief overwhelmed him, he found he simply couldn't paint. If this master was ever to work again, let alone begin a masterpiece that would consume the rest of his life, it was going to take the intervention of an unlikely friend and further tragedy on an epic scale. In 1914, the world's most famous artist, Claude Monet, essentially stopped painting. Overcome by grief and failed eyesight, his paintbrushes and studio were left untouched until the intervention of a close friend, the former French Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau. They'd first met in 1860s Paris when Clemenceau was a young journalist and Monet a struggling artist.
The friendship between Monet and Clemenceau survived and thrived despite the fact, maybe because of the fact, that they were opposites in so many ways. If Clemenceau was the fearsome tiger, Monet was what Clemenceau called the hedgehog. And he always needed someone like Clemenceau or like his wife Elise, someone who could support him.
Clemenceau would come to see Monet and chat to him, to lift him up and try and convince him not to be so depressed and to start painting that would cheer him up. And then between them, they discussed this idea that Monet had already had, but between them, the idea became bigger and more grand.
And that project was to radically expand his obsession with the pond and the water lilies.
This is something that Monet had gone back and forth with throughout his life.
He's been painting the water lily ponds for years and years and years.
And Clemenceau said, these are really rather good. And that was all that Monet seemed to need at that point.
This would be more than a painting, it would be an experience in virtual reality.
Le plus important dans ce projet, c'est le concept d'avoir pensé une œuvre à 360 degrés, donc une œuvre dans laquelle le visiteur est invité à être totalement immergé.
It would evoke the experience of standing on the edge of his pond, Giverny.
This would be on a scale Monet had never attempted before. Each canvas would be 6 by 14 feet, and he planned to paint a whole family of them.
This was huge, this project. First of all, he had to paint the canvases in the garden because he didn't have a studio that was large enough. They were put on wheels so he could move them around and see what they looked like together.
He replaced his old dilapidated studio with a new one specially built to fit his huge canvases. This was the greatest artistic challenge Monet had ever taken on, and time was not on his side. The peace and calm of France was shattered as the Great War now engulfed Europe.
Giverny might seem a small, beautiful place, far removed from the Western Front, but in fact, war came to the village and really stayed there throughout the 4 years that Monet was working on his paintings.
Most of the villagers hurriedly abandoned their homes, not Claude Monet.
And Monet said, if the barbarians want to kill me, they'll have to do so in front of my life's work.
He could hear the fighting, he could hear the bombs and the shooting. Within the first few months, so many young soldiers were killed.
The war was personal to him. Giverny was only 50 kilometers away from the front line, and his stepson and his son were both fighting. He was also growing vegetables in his garden, which he would take to the soldiers in the local hospital to make sure that they had nutrition.
With the war in such close proximity, Monet's methods became dramatic, almost frantic. His grief and encroaching blindness produced a frenzy of creativity comparable to Shakespeare in his prime or the last years of Beethoven.
Painting was such an important part of his life that it was also something that can inspire great rages. As with many artists, with great art comes great temperament, and Monet was definitely no stranger to that.
Never before had this prolific artist painted with such urgency and from such a dark, desperate place.
It was all-consuming. He did not stop. That's what he was doing, dawn till dusk.
Monet was literally painting these beautiful works of art as France was experiencing the darkest chapters in its history. It was descending into the abyss. 1 million people were dying in France as he was working. And that obviously was on his mind the entire time he was working on them.
But he still felt the same way about his water lilies as he had when he first planted them. These landscapes of water and reflection have become an obsession for me, he'd written to a friend. It is beyond my strength as an old man, and yet I want to render what I feel.
The colours became wilder, more outrageous. The brush marks became less controlled.
His subject became smaller. It was all the pond. The only areas of sky and horizon are reflections.
Finally, at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November 1918, the pounding of the guns ceased. After 4 long years and millions dead, the war was over. And the following day, the 12th, Monet decided that once his grand water lilies were finished, he would donate them to the French people.
If you travel in France, you will find every small village has a monument to the First World War. It was a searing, traumatic national experience. Monet, too, felt this tragedy and wanted to make this gesture to contribute something that would perhaps help avert war again and at the same time commemorate the sacrifice of a whole generation.
To an old political ally, now France's ferocious wartime Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau, he wrote, "It's not much, but it's the only way I have of taking part in the victory." When you think about it, these are a very strange proposition for a war memorial. Most countries get great granite columns or stone arches or heroic soldiers done in bronze. And France, what does France get from Monet? France gets some reflections and aquatic plants. But what Monet, in his wisdom, realized was that grief-stricken, harried, anxious people needed a contemplative, even a philosophical experience. These colossal canvases were meant to speak to the spirit of a nation ripped apart by the most brutal conflict the world had yet seen. But rather than hand them over at the moment they might be needed most, Monet couldn't quite let them go.
Monet never felt that he'd finished his paintings, these grandes décorations that he called them. He always felt he needed to do more. He needed to add a bit of paint here, a leaf there, a petal here.
Monet was a perfectionist, and I don't think he was ever happy with any of his paintings. I think he always felt they could be better. One of the wonderful quotes he has is when he wrote to Clemenceau and said, "When I am dead, I shall find their imperfections more bearable." While alive, he could never accept them, and he could never accept that this was everything that he could do.
8 years after the end of the war, on the 5th of December 1926, Monet died, aged 86. For his last moments, Clemenceau, the radical, patriotic politician who'd become his closest friend, was at his side. And on the day he was buried, a mist descended over Giverny.
As one journalist said, Normandy became a Monet painting, almost as if the elements themselves were paying tribute to the artist who had captured them so beautifully for the rest of the world to see.
Shortly afterwards, his vast panels were transported from Giverny to the Musée de l'Orangerie in Paris, where they were installed exactly as Monet had prescribed. There was nothing like them anywhere. The shape of the two oval rooms meant those who visited would have no sense of where the cycle of canvases began or ended.
He'd very carefully decided which ones he wanted alongside each other, adjacent, juxtaposed and all in the gallery. They are exactly as he would have arranged them.
We get to see, when we go into those two rooms, an art exhibition curated by Monet himself. These were the paintings that he hand-picked.
He wanted people to be surrounded by them, which meant they had to be displayed in a panorama.
What we would describe today as an installation that would be immersive.
What Monet had imagined was a way for the viewer to escape into his world. Monet made these pictures so big for a purpose. They surround you, they envelop you. And because they're so big, you can't simply concentrate on one part of one picture for very long. Your eye is caught endlessly by the next thing. And as you let yourself be surrounded and enveloped by these pictures, you get a sense of timelessness, of endlessness. But as you get lost in the cycle of life, it's almost as if a pattern begins to emerge. After a while, you realize that what's happening as one bit of one picture fades into another bit of another picture, as one color bleeds into another color, every color is changing and morphing and rippling around you, and you realize after a while that these are perhaps the world's only really successful paintings of time moving.
The physical dimensions are really significant. The way in which you walk into an entire architectural space and feel as if you are standing there on the edge of the pond, looking across this surface.
Monet's great installation would finally open to the public in May 1927. But the big question remained, would the world be ready for these paintings? Claude Monet's grand decorations, the culmination of a lifetime's work and his gesture to the French people after the First World War, were finally ready to be unveiled to the world after his death. This was a project that may have taken the artist 12 years, but was the world ready? When Monet's extraordinary waterscapes finally went on display to the public in May 1927, just a few months after the artist's death, they completely tanked.
The reviews were terrible. They said that he had left behind nature, which he had painted so convincingly for much of his career, and begun painting internal impressions instead.
They were really criticised. Oh, scathing criticism. The critics said that he hadn't moved on from Impressionism.
They really saw this as the work of someone who had lost his way artistically and maybe even lost his way emotionally or mentally. Monet's godson wrote that Monet died twice, once in Giverny in 1926 and then a second time with the opening of the Orangerie.
Just as the world hadn't been ready for Monet's first exhibition 50 years earlier, so the same thing happened now. People did not come. Clemenceau was devastated. In June 1928, he observed there wasn't a soul there. As Monet's vast canvases began to gather dust, their tailor-made gallery was taken over for other needs.
The space that was built for them was covered with false walls to show other artworks by other artists and other exhibitions.
There were medieval tapestries shown in front of them. When the ceiling leaked and water dripped on the paintings, nobody really cared.
And they used the room almost like a centre for other activities, dog shows even.
That was humiliating enough. But in August 1944, towards the end of the Second World War, the Orangerie was bombed and Monet's canvases were damaged. It was a catalogue of relentless indignities. With shrapnel from Allied shells buried in the canvases, Monet's grand decorations, the work on which he had driven himself to exhaustion for the last 12 years of his life, were now effectively forgotten. As a final insult to Monet's work, in 1966, the Orangerie acquired a new collection of art. And one of the new gallery spaces was built directly over the room of the water lilies, cutting off these paintings so brimming with life from all daylight with a solid concrete ceiling. And that's how they remained for 3 decades. So, how were these extraordinary paintings rediscovered to the point where they became the most famous water lily images in the world?
Just off Fifth Avenue stands the spanking new home of a nationally important institution, the New York Museum of Modern Art.
The next chapter of this story begins in New York, in the then achingly cool Museum of Modern Art. Inside was one of Monet's water lily paintings, a forerunner to his grand decorations.
While the reaction was negative in Europe, over in New York, people were flocking to see that.
And it was becoming a magnet for a new wave of American artists, the abstract expressionists. They painted big, and they wanted to see the vast canvases that the smaller water lily paintings had inspired.
Every young American painter coming to Paris flocked to the Orangerie to pay homage to the great Claude Monet and to see these paintings that they had been hearing about for themselves, and they were astounded by them.
They absolutely loved them, went back to America and started to paint inspired by them.
Rothko, Jackson Pollock, de Kooning, artists that could work big, and artists that could use their whole arm to paint with.
Monet, the master of European Impressionism, was now becoming a figurehead for American abstract art.
Monet n'est pas un peintre abstrait, mais il ouvre les portes d'une possibilité de l'abstraction. Et ça, c'est une qualité qui le met au sommet d'une histoire de l'art du XXe siècle.
But although Monet's paintings were resonating with a new generation of artists, the orangery itself remained something of an embarrassment. Optimistic visitors couldn't believe the way Monet's grand decorations were being displayed. In 1996, it was finally decreed that the gallery would undergo a $36 million renovation to become a more fitting host to its rediscovered treasure. The responsibility was handed to the architect Olivier Brochet.
Quand nous sommes arrivés la première fois à l'orangerie, on avait l'impression de descendre à la cave pour aller voir les nymphéas.
Brochet came up with a radical strategy to light Monet's masterpieces in a way the artist had always dreamed of. He decided to remove the concrete ceiling above the water lilies and replace it with a skylight, all without damaging the murals themselves.
C'est un défi technique immense. Les murs que vous voyez, on ne peut pas la déplacer. Et on ne peut pas décrocher ces peintures du mur. Et donc ici, on est en train de construire l'abat-jour pour ramener la lumière. Et les nymphéas, dans les conditions, sont toujours là-dedans, comme celle-là.
Now sitting deep in the heart of a construction site, Monet's canvases had to be protected by specially made cases.
Sur toute l'œuvre, il y avait des palpeurs, tous les 20 cm. Et dès qu'on faisait trop de vibrations au-dessus, il y avait une alerte et le conservateur venait du Louvre et arrêtait le chantier. Très souvent, nous étions obligés d'arrêter le chantier et ça a beaucoup ralenti le chantier.
It took 6 years and almost $40 million, but in 2006, the doors finally reopened. And this time, the public was ready.
You couldn't get more different from the time they were first displayed in 1927. People celebrated, media news went round the world, everyone was queuing to see them.
The paintings were utterly transformed. That space was transformed, and you could finally see the paintings as Monet wanted us to be able to see them, in a kind of natural light, in a beautiful kind of luminescence, which was the sort of light that he strove to paint throughout the course of his entire lifetime.
Notre grande fierté, c'est d'avoir, d'une part, restitué la primauté, la pleine présence de l'œuvre de Monet, comme il l'avait voulu, comme il l'avait installé. Elle a retrouvé son esprit d'origine.
Cette incroyable immensité picturale dans laquelle il nous invite finalement à nous plonger et dans laquelle, par le biais de ce bassin, il a capté quelque chose de la beauté du monde. Et c'est là où Monet est un pionnier total.
From being forgotten, they now have a unique importance in the life of this city.
The grand decorations are so special because they were a tribute to the French people. They were a tribute to the war. It wasn't just water and trees. The trees were almost bowing in respect to the Parisians.
It's a temple to art and a temple for modern France.
This whole gallery is devoted to these paintings, and it's what Monet wanted. He wanted it to be a place of meditation, a place of peace, and you see that. You see visitors sitting there peacefully, taking it all on. They're very calming, they're very uplifting. It's an experience, a complete experience.
It's now been nearly 100 years since these epic murals were first hung on the Orangery's walls. What an extraordinary journey these canvases have been on, from their traumatic conception to being buried alive and then refound by a new generation. It truly is quite a tale. These aren't really pictures about plants or even reflections. These are pictures of the beauty and transience and therefore the poignancy of human life, indeed all life. None of us are here for very long, but it is gorgeous while it lasts. And that is Monet's message to the French and, thank God, to the rest of us as well. But I don't want to end this as a film about art history. If you possibly can, come and see these pictures for yourself. But please, don't bring a camera. Bring your eyes and your heart, because that is all you need. Next time, the quintessentially English landscape. You want to be there and feel the wind in your face as the clouds scud over your head, which sparked an artistic revolution a long way from home.
French artists cannot believe the originality and the freshness of Constable's approach.
I go behind the canvas of John Constable's Hay Wain.